Huh? Let's go. Happy Halloween! This is my absolute favorite holiday, and in this video I'll be exploring my own concept for a third game to continue the story of fan-favorite GameCube spin-offs Pokemon Coliseum and Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness, known as Pokemon XD Descent of Darkness, expanding upon the Orre region with brand new locations to honor and breathe new life into this overlooked region, introducing a brand new cast of characters alongside familiar faces from the first two games, as well as characters and Pokemon from my own Fakemon regions. And of course, it would not be the Orre region without Shadow Pokémon. But I'll be taking it a step further with the new class of Shadow Pokémon I came up with, each inspired by one of the 7 deadly sins. But there's a lot more to these shady Shadow Pokémon than meets the eye, as the darkness within them has corrupted them beyond repair, mutating them into these malevolent, new Shadow Warp forms. Most of which I already introduced in a previous video at the start of the month, but you'll learn even more about all of them and their context within this game in this video. But for those of you who haven't played Pokemon Coliseum or Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness and aren't familiar with Shadow Pokemon or how they work, I do recommend checking out that video as it covers that in great detail. Also, if you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to show your boy some love and hit that like button, leave a comment down below to let me know what you think, and most importantly, please subscribe to my channel so I can keep it growing. As most of you know by now, while the concepts and designs featured on my channel are all my own, I don't actually draw the artwork featured in my videos, as I have commissioned over 40 talented artists who I work with intimately throughout the creative process, down to the tiniest of details, to help bring my ideas to life just as I imagine them, so I can take you on these exciting journeys through my imagination. So please make sure to go follow and support all of them as well. And for this project, I actually worked with a smaller circle of artists than I normally do, as I wanted to try to branch out a little and feature some artists I haven't really had the chance to yet, all of which did a phenomenal job, so please make sure to go support all of them. Their links will be provided down below in the description. So without further ado, let's take a look at this hypothetical game taking place in a reimagined version of the Orre region. For those of you who don't know, the Orre region is an arid region said to have been inspired by Phoenix, Arizona, with some technologically advanced elements added into the region's locations and character designs. So I tried my best to honor all of that, while also expanding upon it using even more locations from Arizona as inspiration for a lot of these new areas to help make the region and its Pokemon species feel even more diverse. Since those games were released all the way back in Gen 3, I'll also be bringing Pokemon I feel fit the aesthetics of the region from generations 4 through 9, as well as Pokemon from my own Fakemon regions, as this hypothetical game would exist within my shared Fakemon universe, as there'll be plenty of crossovers and connections between this region and all of my own, including one of the main characters featured in this game. Let's start with the new protagonist of this hypothetical game, Zion. Zion is a mysterious Pokemon trainer. Even they are constantly trying to uncover more about their hazy past. Calm and collected, Zion is always analyzing the best course of action for any problems that may arise. Accompanied by their partner Pokemon and best friends, the nurturing Mummion and Ghost-type evolution from my first Fakemon region, the Luika region, and the spunky Dragon-type evolution, Drekion, from my second Fakemon region, the Fearon region. Both are formidable battlers, perfectly in sync with Zion and one another. While they are each hesitant of strangers at first, they love to cuddle up by a warm fire with their master. Zion is not only an expert Pokemon trainer, but analyst, if not the best in the scientific Coliseum of Shadow Pokémon. If you couldn't tell by now, Zion even has their own Aura Reader and Snag Machine to help capture Shadow Pokémon, earning them the title Shadow Slayer, and a title they will earn with the resurgence of Shadow Pokémon in the Orre region as a meteorite crashed down on the region as you saw in the opening, unleashing a foreign virus onto the land. In the previous games and even in the context of this game, Until now, Shadow Pokémon were thought to be created artificially through the Cypher Corporation's inhuman experiments on Pokémon, closing their hearts, so they could commit heinous acts. However, I decided to explain the origins of these experiments and the creation of Shadow Pokémon by explaining these horrible experiments were only possible using small remains of the same dark substance found on this meteorite, found before the events of the first two games. A dangerous substance that is far more abundant and potent than ever on this meteorite, even mutating some Pokemon to the point they can no longer be purified through normal means. It is up to you, aka Zion, to stop these sinister Shadow Pokemon and the spread of this soul-eating virus before it's too late. The game starts at a massive crash site known as the Cosmic Crater, inspired by a real crater in Arizona known as Meteor Crater. Sensing all the immense shadow energy using their aura reader, Zion goes to investigate, as you saw in the opening. Now, unlike the previous games in this series, you'd be able to see and encounter wild Pokemon in the overworld like the more recent games. However, like the previous games in this series, you can only capture Shadow Pokémon, as that's what the plot revolves around, as you're trying to stop the spread of this virus. So while you would see non-Shadow Pokémon in the overworld, they'd be more decorative, but don't worry, you'd still encounter plenty of wild Shadow Pokémon, as this virus is spreading like a wildfire. And for those of you who never played Pokemon Coliseum or Gale of Darkness, you can catch other trainers' Pokemon as long as it's a Shadow Pokemon. That would be no different in this game. That's actually where the name Snag Machine comes from, as it was created by now dismantled group Team Snag'em. But since Shadow Pokemon can now be created organically thanks to this virus, you'd also be able to use it to capture Shadow Pokemon in the wild as well, because previously, Shadow Pokemon being man-made and used for such criminal acts were only used by trainers and weren't found in the wild, and obviously this meteorite changes everything. Speaking of which, back to Cosmic Crater, while exploring this site, you'd encounter some cosmic-themed wild Pokemon that you'd have to battle, all orbiting the meteorite in which they appear to have arrived with. After making your way to the center of the crater, where the meteorite is found, you'd be approached by an awkward and talkative girl named Namid and her Elgem. Namid is of Native American, or I guess Native Orinian descent, as I really wanted to expand upon the Orre region's lore, as it is inspired by Phoenix, Arizona, and the West in general, which obviously has a big Native American population and history, and it's a group that I feel is underrepresented in Pokemon. In fact, I don't think I can think of any Native American inspired characters off the top of my head, not saying they don't exist, so I really wanted to explore that a little bit more to flesh out this region and make it feel even more unique. Namid is obsessed with space and Ultra Beasts ever since first encountering her Elgem out in the desert years ago, as it helped inspire her to look to the stars as she wanted to learn more about Pokemon from outer space or other dimensions. Hence all the references to Ultra Beasts snuck into her quirky design. Having spotted this meteor months ago through her telescope, she has been waiting for this moment, hoping to be the first to explore this crater and study the meteorite. Part of her even seems to think an Ultra Beast may have arrived on it, as she sees a lot of other Pokemon from space have arrived with it. Zion, however, in a monotone matter-of-fact way, tells her that Ultra Beasts come from Ultra Wormholes, not meteorites, stuttering in embarrassment, saying of course she knows that. But before she can finish, you hear a loud explosion from the meteorite as Shadow Deoxys comes flying out of the debris, scaring Namid as she falls to the ground shaking with fear. Zion, reading the astronomical shadow energy radiating off of the Shadow Pokemon, is ready to battle, and you do exactly that, as Shadow Deoxys in its original form would act as the game's first boss and the tutorial to its new mechanics, which would pretty much be the same for this game as in the previous games, with just some slight minor changes to kind of spice things up and fit the more modern mechanics of the newer games. The boss battles in this game, however, against all the Shadow Pokemon would be 2 versus 1, and similar to the boss battles in Legends Arceus, where they were more like an action RPG, and you'd have to dodge the opposing Pokemon's attacks, and you could even faint outside of the turn-based style battles. The biggest difference being the boss battles within this game would be far more cinematic than anything we've ever seen in Pokemon before, with action commands added in to shake things up and initiate the traditional turn-based style sections of battle, once again being 2 versus 1, at least for these big boss battles. Another difference is, rather than throwing bombs to weaken your foe outside of the turn-based style sections, your two Pokemon, in this case being Mummion and Drekion, would auto-attack only if they are in a distance from the opponent, akin to the mechanics in Xenoblade Chronicles, for those of you familiar with that series. But once again, you don't have to do this. You could still win by just doing the auto command into the turn-based style sections. But this is an additional way to win and just adds more depth to the battles, as I feel the turn-based style has gotten kind of stagnant, and I really appreciated these changes to Pokemon Legends Arceus, if you couldn't tell by now, which most of you who follow my channel probably can. But that being said, it's still nowhere near as RPG style as the Forge Form weapons are mechanic, but it's a step in the right direction. As I previously mentioned, all the Shadow Warp Pokemon you face in the boss battles are meant to represent one of the 7 deadly sins, with Deoxys being the outlier, but still representing a sin, if not what many people believe to be the most unforgivable of the sins, despair, being the complete loss or absence of hope, as that's what this Pokemon's presence in the Orre region represents, as it carries this dark contagion with it. It's also important to note that you will face off against Shadow Deoxys multiple times throughout Pokemon Descent of Darkness, each time being in a new form. So each boss battle against Shadow Deoxys will be drastically different. Speaking of which, all of the Shadow Warp Pokemon you face in these intense Pokemon Legends Arceus inspired boss battles not only look different, but have beefed up stats and a signature Shadow move after mutating. Now, it's important to note that Shadow Pokemon keep their original typings, and Shadow isn't a type in that sense. But in the previous games, there were Shadow moves, which can only be learnt by Shadow Pokemon. But once again, since Shadow isn't a type, these moves, as powerful as they are, cannot receive Stab. That being said, Shadow moves are super effective on any non-Shadow Pokemon, which is even better if you ask me, but the trade-off is Shadow moves aren't very effective on other Shadow Pokemon. So any Shadow Pokemon you snag on your adventure will definitely come in handy in these boss battles against the Shadow Warp Pokemon. Now, in Pokemon Gale of Darkness, Shadow moves had unlimited PP, but given the current state of the Pokemon meta, and that this game would have online features, unlike the previous games, I decided to retcon that in this game, so they weren't too OP. Speaking of OP, Shadow Deoxys' signature move, Shadow Shower, is essentially a Shadow version of Draco Meteor, as it summons a bunch of Shadow Meteors down from the sky, similar to the one it landed in, dealing a massive amount of damage. And given the mutated Shadow Warp Pokemon, unlike your typical Shadow Pokemon, also have elevated stats, Shadow Deoxys has a whopping 690 as its base stats. Not that far off from most mascot legendary Pokemon's base stats, as that's essentially what this is, and the same exact stats as Eternatus. But fear not, despite being the very first boss battle, these insane stats don't really matter, as this is just a tutorial, so you are pretty much guaranteed to win. So outside the normal turn-based sections of this battle tutorial, teaching you the same mechanics I'm sure every Pokemon fan knows by heart by now, in the overworld sections of this tutorial, you'll learn how your Mummion and Drekion's auto attacks work. You'll also learn how to dodge, as you evade a series of comets falling from the sky in succession, and you'll even learn how to use the action commands in response to an attack where Deoxys extends its DNA strand arms out into a fist to punch you from far distances. So if you hit the action button in time, it will trigger a cinematic cutscene where both Mummion and Drekion block the fist before it hits you. Then Mummion, using the bandage drapings on its head, squeezing tightly, holding Deoxys' extended arm in place so Drekion can run up it, and they will both attack Deoxys together, as Mummion will launch a Shadow Ball attack on the restrained Deoxys. At the same exact time, Drekion will use a Dragon Claw head-on right on Deoxys' face. This will automatically end the battle no matter what HP Deoxys has at the time, as Deoxys is clearly irritated. After defeating Shadow Deoxys, it would fly off, and Namid is absolutely impressed by your skills, and kind of talking your ear off as you continue to analyze the crater and its shadow energy, which is unlike anything you've ever seen before. This is when Zion, shocked, reveals to Namid that they've never seen a Shadow Pokemon in the wild or organically made like this before, giving a little exposition into how Shadow Pokemon were artificially created for new players as they explain it to Namid. They are also alarmed as the wild Pokemon in this area make it clear that this virus is starting to spread rapidly, and right after Zion says this, Namid's Elgyem starts to become infected and lunges at her. but Mummion is able to use its bandages to wrap it up and stop it before it can hurt her, as Zion uses their snag machine to capture it, assuring Namid that they promise to purify it for her. Namid is really worried about her L-Gem, but also fascinated by everything and offers to help you, but you say you work alone, before having what appears to be a glitchy flashback of Wes and Rui laughing together in Fennec City in the first game. You then snap out of it, and Namid asks you if you're okay. Mummion and Drekion seem worried about you too, as they each go rub up against one of your legs to comfort you. Namid then promises to be of use, saying her father is extremely successful and wealthy, running an entire company, the Totem Corporation, which honors the past and Orre's rich history in innovative ways to help build towards a brighter future. Found in the bustling metropolis of Neo Aqueni, which is the largest and most technologically advanced city in the Orre region, built right beside the original Aqueni village Namid and her father's ancestors once called home. And this of course is a brand new location I added to the region, once again to help expand its lore, and help give some Native American representation. While her father is a very busy man and workaholic running this massive tech company, everything he does is for his family, and he loves to spoil his daughter. That's how she manages to get a lot of her tech. She says maybe he'll be able to use his resources to even help you find out more about this meteorite and stop the spread of this foreign virus. Hesitant, Zion agrees to allow her to help, only if she's careful and doesn't talk too much. Without hesitation, she instantly says yes, until she hears the less talking part, but says she can't make any promises on that end, but she will try. Mummion chuckles at this, but Drekion and Zion don't seem amused. So if you couldn't tell by now, Namid is sort of the companion and comic relief of this game to help balance Zion's more stoic personality. Namid asks where they're off to next, and Zion replies Fennec City, the location they just saw in their flashback. Namid asks what's in Fennec City, and they say an old friend. Namid is confused though and says, "I thought you said you had no friends." But Zion continues on without her. Now Fennec City is an iconic location from the first two games. It's a gorgeous, oasis-like city in the middle of the desert of the southeast of Orre. While expanded a little and now overflowing with more wild Pokemon, flourishing in its oasis-like setting, this location is pretty much the same for the most part, as it didn't change that much between the last two games. Here you'll encounter the companion from the first game, Pokemon Coliseum, Rui. Rui is determined, caring, and brave, but can be a bit bossy and even stubborn at times. She has psychic abilities that allow her to detect Shadow Pokémon without needing an Aura Reader, which the hero of the first game, Wes, used to his advantage. Because of this, despite not having any Pokemon previously, I decided to give Rui some Pokemon, including a partner Pokemon in the form of a rambunctious Riolu named Rhea. This Riolu would try to pick a fight with both Mummion and Drekion when first meeting them, despite being smaller than them both and outnumbered, quickly put in its place as you'd actually have to battle her using Amuna and her Riolu, as she doesn't seem too happy to see you. Both Rui and Wes are from Pokemon Coliseum and were missing in the sequel Gale of Darkness, so I try to offer my own in-game reasoning to why that is, some of which Rui will even allude to when you first encounter her, as she seems surprised to see Zion, almost as if she recognizes them. So naturally Zion will ask if they've met before, and she says not quite, but she knows exactly who they are, the Shadow Slayer. Namid is confused by this interaction, trying to crack a joke to lower the tension, but no one seems to appreciate it. Zion then goes on to tell her that Shadow Pokemon have returned. Since this game is about 1.5 maybe 2 years after the last game, and since Shadow Pokemon were thought to be artificially made by the Cypher Corporation until now, and this organization was seemingly dismantled at the end of the last game, it only makes sense now that Shadow Pokemon haven't been seen in the Orre region for a while now. So Rui says this can't be, but to prove your case, you let Namid's infected Shadow Elgem out of its snack ball. Able to read its Shadow Aura, she is shocked, and asks how this is possible. Namid, excited, steps in and gives her her own exaggerated and abbreviated version of these events with the Meteor and Shadow Deoxys. Rui, somehow following this, is shocked to hear Shadow Pokemon can now be infected organically and in the wild nonetheless. She asks what she can do to help, and you say you know she had a friend, implying Wes, who you also saw in your little flashback. Rui then replies, "Wes. Yeah, he isn't my friend, not anymore," as if she doesn't want to talk about it. Zion then says he's seen him before, and says he stopped the Shadow Pokemon, right? And she says that's correct, he did, but he isn't the only one. She tells you to stop by Professor Crane's Pokemon HQ lab found in the northwest of the region, and when you get there to ask for a young boy named Mykel, the hero of the second game, saying if that's a hero you're looking for, he's the one you should seek. Zion thanks her. She then says if Shadow Pokemon have returned, it's only a matter of time until the criminals within the region find out and try to use them to their advantage like they have in the past. This means groups like Team Snag'em or Cypher could resurface, which wouldn't be good. Rui then says before you do anything you should stop by the underground city beneath Pyrite Town called the Under. If you're looking for any kind of word of these types of criminals, and what they have planned with the Shadow Pokemon, or even if they know about this resurgence, that this would be the place to go, but to be careful. Namid then chimes in saying she thought the Under was destroyed, referring to the end of the first game, as this location wasn't accessible in the second, but she then says that's what the criminals wanted these people to think, so they could rebuild and have their own underground city to carry on illegal activity once again. Namid then says she will sit this one out, as she doesn't want to get into that kind of trouble, and Zion agrees that's for the best. Rui then offers Namid to stay here with her, so she can help purify her Elgym, and Namid obviously seems to like this idea. Now, unlike the last games, this game would be open world for you to explore between locations, not only walking this time, as you couldn't really do that before, but you'd also have a transportation device to, basically zoom around the region and the deserts as well, just like in the previous games. But now it could also go over bodies of water, up mountains, and do all sorts of stuff, so you could traverse the region like you can in the more recent games. And in a lot of these wild areas, once again, you'd see a lot of regular Pokemon just there for decoration, as well as a lot of Shadow Pokemon for you to snag in the Pokemon Legends Arceus style, which you'd later be able to purify through the same exact means of the last game. Your goal is to catch and purify as many Shadow Pokemon as you can, once again to try to stop the spread of the Shadow virus. So you won't just be stealing Shadow Pokemon from criminals, as they are now created organically in the wild thanks to this meteorite's virus. The Shadow Pokemon in each area would vary, but I'll show you some examples of the Pokemon in each of these major areas that you would encounter, and almost all of them would be found as Shadow Pokemon as well. Now, on your way to the mining town of Pyrite Town to investigate, you'd encounter a lot of desert and desert Pokemon. Pyrite Town is a mining town of rogues and ruffians featured in the first two games, with the secret criminal civilization, the Under, hiding deep underground. You'd arrive in Pyrite Town, where you clearly don't seem welcome, especially after being spotted by two criminals, Gonzap and Boone. The roided out one, Gonzap, is from the previous games and is the former leader of the criminal group Team Snag'em, while the cowboy looking character Boone is an original character I came up with to further expand the Orre region's western US inspirations, with little touches like the Star U badge or Pokeball shooting pistol to make it clear he's part of the Pokemon world. I also wanted to give him more mechanical looking cowboy boots to fit the more futuristic aesthetics of most of the Orre region's characters. Boone is a ruffian and outlaw in the Orre region, working for whoever's interests best serve him. Like Rui, much to Zion's surprise, they both seem to recognize you and go as far to call you the Shadow Slayer, as Gonzap tells Boone to leave the Shadow Slayer, you, to him, and that they can't let the boss find out about this. This once again confuses you, as you don't recognize any of these people until Gonzap steps forward and you get another glitchy flashback of him before the battle commences. Gonzap will use a small team of 2 for this battle, including a Shadow Diggerbee, which you can snag using your Stag Machine. After defeating Gonzap, he says you aren't wanted here, and to mind your own business. Fearless, Zion will walk right past Gonzap, ignoring him as Mumyon uses the eye on its tail to give him a mean look, and Drekion hisses at him while they pass by. Now, after making your way into the Pyrite Cave, you'd find a bunch of infected Shadow Pokemon on your way to the Under, where you'd finally find Boone in the middle of a conversation with 3 thugs, as they are discussing Relgam Tower. At least that's all you can make out. After realizing you are behind him, Boone tells the other thugs to scram. Boone is surprised, yet impressed you managed to beat Gonzap, but says he won't be as easily defeated. He then challenges you to a double battle, starting off with Cacnea and Bramblin, followed by Lycanroc Midnight form, and a Shadow Lycanroc Midday form that you once again can snag. After defeating Boone, you realize this battle was a mere distraction. Zion demands answers, and Boone smirks, saying, "Ah, so you can show emotion after all," which only makes Zion even more upset. Slightly intimidated, Boone finally starts to speak, basically saying that the meteorite landing in the Orre region is no coincidence, just business as usual, and not even you, the Shadow Slayer, can stop what's coming. Boone then manages to shoot a smoke ball out of his Poké Pistol, allowing him to escape, with Drekion and Mummion briefly looking around for him in the smoke, until Zion tells him it's okay to give up the search, that they got the answers they came for. But then, out of nowhere, everyone starts running away in a panic, as you realize some rocks start to crumble from the ceiling as it's caving in. There's then a little earthquake, and someone runs by saying a wild Pokemon is destroying the mine shafts. It's gonna cave in. So naturally, you use your Ore Reader to try to find it and make your way back to the Pyrite Caves above, where you'd find the culprit, Shadow Trezor, from the Orre region, the first of the 7 sinister Shadow Pokemon you'd encounter as more action RPG and at times cinematic boss battles, this one representing the sin Greed, as the search for or excavation of jewels and rare minerals are literally greed at its finest. I also felt it not only would make for a challenging boss battle, as its design is already tanky, but because its minor concept lent perfectly to the Orre region, especially within the location of Pyrite Town and the Pyrite Caves from the first 2 games, which already includes mine shafts. As for the difference in this shadow form, it once had a deep blue color, reflecting the Tanzanite stone heavily excavated and sought after in Africa, but now has a bloody crimson red color, representing blood diamonds or blood money, not only fitting of greed, but the whole mining concept as well. Not to mention, perfect for Halloween, as it makes it look quite scary. Its drill-like arms also now have spikes along them, which it uses to execute its new signature shadow move, Shadow Drill, which works just like Dig, as it burrows under the ground for a turn, until it's ready to come up and strike. In a rampage as it's infected to the point of mutation, Shadow Treasure is drilling through the caves, causing all the cave-ins, and at this rate it will eventually destroy the Under, with lots of people still down there. So you try to stop it, but it ends up chasing you through the mine shafts in sections of the battle. These would be the cinematic moments. There will be some cave-ins which will give you small windows of time to run, but like in Legends Arceus, if you take enough damage, you will faint. So you have to avoid its attacks and the falling rocks, and let your Pokemon auto-attack until the action commands appear, allowing you to enter the 2-on-1 turn-based sections where you can do some real damage. But be careful, as its stats are a lot stronger. After defeating Shadow Treasure and capturing it with the Snag Machine, you'd find out you managed to save the Under, which brings you relief. So you'd return to Phoenix City to pass on what you've learned to Namid and Rui. Thankfully, Namid's L-Gem has since been purified, which you're happy to see, as it starts to float around and play with Mummion and Drekion as you continue talking. But you'd show Rui Shadow Treasure, who is now under your command, but come to find out that it can't be purified through the normal means, as the darkness has seemed to mutate it too far. She says she's seen this once before, as this was the same case for Shadow Lugia after Mykel captured it at the end of Gale of Darkness. So she then says you need to use the purification chamber to fix it, as that seemed to work for Mykel before. You ask her where it's located, and she says with a frown that's a thing, it was destroyed. You ask why, and then she says, let's just say the wrong people didn't want it standing in the way of their plans, if the Shadow Pokémon were ever to return. You then tell her that makes sense, given the information you just got about all these criminal organizations knowing about this meteorite coming before it even happened, as Boone made it quite clear that this was planned. Frustrated, Zion says that they have to go to Relgam Tower after hearing the bad guys talk about this location. It's the only clue they've got. Namid says she was fine with meteorites and Pokemon from outer space, but now that her L-Gem's been purified, she'd rather sit this one out. But she says she'd love to help out by reaching out to her father to once again to try to see if any of his resources from his Totem Corporation can help them stop the spread of the Shadow Virus. Rui and Zion both agree that's a good idea. Rui says she will reach out to Professor Crane and Mykel on your behalf while you investigate Relgam Tower. For those of you who are loyal fans to these games, Rui and Mykel once again weren't ever in the same games and haven't met in the canon. But like I said, there is a massive time jump between this game and the last one, so it is quite clear that they've met between then and now. Now at Relgam Tower, which is yet another iconic location from the previous games, in the form of a members-only tower that is jam-packed with lots of entertainment, such as gaming areas, shopping areas, dining areas, in addition to its own suspended Coliseum for battling. In fact, like most of the previous games, a lot of these locations would have their own Coliseums for various tournaments to compete in outside of the main story, or capturing Shadow Pokemon in the wild, just to offer something new. You'd even be able to snag plenty of rare Shadow Pokemon from trainers in these tournaments, just like in the previous games as well. As I said though, this is an exclusive members-only tower and Coliseum, but you'd use your cunning mind to have Mummion and Drekion cause a distraction long enough for you to hack your way in. While investigating Relgum Tower, you'd actually enter in and compete in a tournament just to get more information. At first they'd say your names are not on the list, but you'd use one of your high-tech devices so you're able to change that without them even noticing, as you tell them to look again, in which case they will apologize profusely. In the background there'll be a mysterious girl eavesdropping into your conversation with her eye on you, with just the back of her head visible. That mysterious girl being none other than Twyla, whom I just introduced in the second DLC video for the Orre Region, as she was a battle brain in the floating battle frontier. So it's only natural you'd encounter the former tower tycoon here at Relgum Tower, which is a fun little reference. While she comes across as bubbly with the occasional bite, when we last saw her she ended up playing an antagonistic role as she betrayed her grandfather and the former champion Odin in order to spite him for refusing to give her everything she felt she was promised, going as far to destroy the region. But to be fair, she was possessed by the dark aura of an evil legendary Pokemon, Frostfire, sealed away by her grandfather in an ancient artifact known as the Chaos Crown. While a young child, she snuck into his chamber and came across this Chaos Crown, which is how the darkness found its way inside of her, and she shared her mind and body with this dark entity ever since, leading her otherwise sweet self to do some of these heinous acts. However, her dark half likes to use her bubbly personality as a disguise, so you never know who you're actually talking to. Also, those of you who aren't familiar with mental health or split personality disorder, please know this is not that, especially as her darker half is the result of a literal dark entity stemming from a Pokemon living inside of her. So this is clearly all fiction. So please, don't take it personally, don't jump to any conclusions, or try to associate the two. It's not that deep, and those of you who are familiar with split personality disorder know that's not how it actually works. But that is an actual struggle that real people deal with, so I did want to make that clear just so no one, takes it personally, because I myself actually deal with my share of mental health issues. Anyways, Twyla's design is literally split in two to reference her dual nature, the light and the darkness, as well as Norse god Hel, who she is loosely inspired by as half of Hel is dead in a lot of the stories and depictions. Anyways, Twyla is back and up to no good again, but again hiding behind her true self's good girl persona, which Zion isn't falling for, by the way. Mostly because they don't really care for people, let alone anyone as happy or disingenuine as her. In fact, Drekion will growl at her when she goes to pet it after her first interaction with you. She tries to play it off with a laugh, saying she didn't mean to startle it was just too cute, and that she has two babies of her own who are just as protective. She then throws out her partner Pokemon Absol and Retri. For those of you who haven't followed my previous series, Retri being my own Fakemon I created in the Orre Region to act as a counterpart to Absol, the yin to its yang, with its name being a play on retribution, as Absol's name is derived from absolution, and they are opposites. Mummion and Drekion don't seem to like Absol and Retri any more than they do Twyla though. Twyla once again plays it off giggling, saying, "Looks like they can't wait to battle, I look forward to it." She then skips away, but the look on Zion's face makes it clear they know something is off. You'd participate in the tournament, which is a series of short 2-on-2 double battles with opponents with tag-centric Pokemon until you finally face off against Twyla. After beating her, her dark side would briefly come out as she makes a snide comment, but after the match she would come to talk to you almost in private in this kind of like locker room setting detached from the Coliseum, where she will go right back to her good girl routine. But now that you're alone, you suddenly ask her why she has a snag machine of her own. Something you say you've been meaning to ask. By the way, those of you who followed my last series probably noticed she's had this snag machine all along. That is not a coincidence, but more on that later. She smirks and drops the act, and says, "You're quite smart for a hunk of metal." Immediately afterwards, the screen starts to glitch uncontrollably.